Welcome to Career in Ruins, where this week we're going to be digging into Stonehenge with an absolute rock star of an archaeologist.
A rock star, you say, Lawrence?
Yeah, I've been excited about this week's episode for a long time. It's someone we've both had the pleasure of working with for a while, and he's a thoroughly fantastic human being. But we'll park that for a
I'd
second. How
say
have you been?
I'm good, but without revealing too much. Rockstar's a pun that works on many levels, and I'm quite happy with that. But no, I've been good. I've been good. Keeping busy this week. Lots of exciting stuff on. Preparing for a conference at work, which is going to be exciting.
Is that tag?
TAG, yeah, the Theoretical Archaeology Group coming to us in just a couple of weeks now, which is going to be fun.
Excellent. I'm hoping to be in attendance. I've not got any papers submitted, but I prefer these conferences. Something though, ones like Tag, it's better to listen and try and work out what people are talking about.
Almost certainly. How about you? What have you been up to?
Well, conferences, as you say. So this weekend just gone, yesterday it finished. I was at the Computational Applications and Quantitative Methods in Archaeology conference in Canterbury. So saw lots of fantastic people that we know. People like Chris Caswell was there. He's also the what's the word I'm looking for? He's on the committee, and plenty of other brilliant archaeologists. Absolutely blown away by. We have an award for master's students and their thesi, anything like whatever the word is. And four of them came. So someone from York, someone from Glasgow School of Art, someone from UCL, and then somewhere else. But they absolutely blew me away. I'm always absolutely taken by the hard work that master students do and the amazing research that they do. So whether it's one student was looking at recreating artificial light in virtual reconstructions. One student was looking at 3D printing and 3D modeling of sites to look at lost traditional skills and tool making. Another student, the one I particularly liked, was looking at 3D recording of heritage trees. That's off the back of the loss of Sycamore Gap in Northumberland and Hadrian's Wall. Famous for Robin Hood, of course. And the fourth one was looking at the arrival of erratic stone artifacts from Paleolithic sites or early human sites off the Isle of Wight, and sort of new techniques to try and understand where these erratic artifacts might have come from. But it was absolutely brilliant to see so many nerdy, fantastic people.
It did look good, but I could have sworn you sent me a picture of you with a giant beard. What was going on there?
Yeah, and 10 out of 10 to one of the speakers who did some AI on myself and the treasurer of CAA Cat by giving her a pink Mohican and myself a huge beard, and making people question the legitimacy of AI, the use of AI in archaeology, which perfectly well sort of demonstrated, I thought.
But you say that, but I mean, I've seen a whole new look for you now. I can see you with a giant foot-long beard. I mean, are you tempted?
A bit like ZZ Top, wasn't it? Yeah, yeah. But no, I'm not tempted. I'm not tempted at all. But I think as a nice segue into this evening's podcast, what it did remind me is my love for all things digital archaeology and GIS and spatial analysis and 3D modeling, and it kind of started making me think about my early career in ruins. And one of the first proper jobs that I got, which was working on a project called Google Seeing Beneath Stonehenge, which was looking at bringing in all the data from today's participant will have to remind me that the length of times, but a substantial amount of time of field work from across the Stonehenge World Heritage Site into a sort of interactive portal on Google Earth, and it certainly was a starting point for where I am today. So I love digital stuff, Derek.
So your bit of digital career in ruins leads us nicely on then to our guest today. And as Lauren said at the beginning, an absolute rock star, or a stone star, you could say. But someone I've been looking forward to catching up with, someone I knew very well when I was in Sheffield back in the day. So has worked with both Lawrence and I over the years. But it's the incredible Professor Mike Parker Pearson from UCL, who is perhaps most famous for his groundbreaking work at Stonehenge, excavations of the wonderful Durrington walls, and has been following that story of Stonehenge all the way to South Wales. Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Great to talk to you. Yes, it's been a while.
It has. You haven't aged a day.
Oh, Mike, it's so lovely to see you. And I was trying to remember. I think the last time, well, actually, so I saw you last year at Chris's wedding, didn't I?
Yeah, that's right.
Chris and Claire's wedding. That was good.
Yeah.
But in terms of in the field, I think it was on my 30th birthday in Wales. So that's a good 8 years ago. So
Mhm.
it's lovely to see you. And
Right.
thank you so much for your time this evening and for sharing your what is going to be an incredible career in ruins with our listeners. And I know people are going to really enjoy listening to this. But I wonder if you'd happily kick us off by talking us through that amazing career from where you started from and to where you are today.
Well, I always wanted to be an archaeologist from as long ago as I can remember, I think aged 4. And the real breakthrough was actually going on an excavation. 1972, a rescue dig before the M5 was being built, and then the next summer and the summer after that. So Ilchester in 74 and 75 were just fantastic fun. And I thought if I could do this for the rest of my life, I'd just be the happiest person ever. And so in the autumn of 76, I pitched up at Southampton, and there were 3 colleagues, 3 fellow students I worked very closely with over the next 3 years. And of course, one of them was Tim Darvill, who sadly died a month or so ago. And we were taught by this extraordinary professor and such a young team of academics that he had gathered around him. That was Colin Renfrew. And I've got some very sad news because he died literally today. And notice of his death has literally just been announced a matter of minutes ago. But he was just a stunningly engaging. I think I'd never met anyone quite as clever as he was. And he just kind of galvanized us. I should also say that working alongside Tim Darvill, Tim was also like me and like Roger Thomas and Bob Smith. We formed a kind of foursome who probably annoyed the rest of our students, fellow students, immensely because we were so damned keen. And we claimed we'd already done everything and knew everything, which of course we didn't, but we thought we did. And he just ran through, really, I think, just created the environment that we really thrived in, so that one of the key things was putting together a conference called A Future for Our Past. And we invited all the great and the good in British archaeology to come and put forward their vision for how archaeology in Britain should develop. We were most keen on really ending the split between the field work of we didn't call it commercial, but the rescue world and the academic world. I don't feel we've really made a lot of progress in the last 50 years, but at least we tried.
Alex, I'm really, really sorry to hear that. I mean, that's massive news for archaeology, massive news for the discipline, and in such a short space of time with Tim as well, two absolute heroes of archaeology. We're here to talk about you primarily, but I'd love to hear a few of those memories about Colin in the early days, because I've only met him in the last few years at various conferences. I remember him as an excellent dancer on the dance floor at the tag parties. But what are your memories of Colin?
Well, I dug for him, both Tim and I dug for him on the island of Milos in the Cyclades on a Bronze Age city. And he seemed very much the grown-up, but of course he was only having his 40th birthday at the time. Looking back on it, he was a young man, effectively. And yeah, I think he was one of those people you could never win an argument against. And the difficulty I found with him was that he wasn't interested in actually discussing something to work it through. He'd take a position and then defend it and try and demonstrate that you were wrong. A kind of, you got to remember that, of course, he had started out with political ambitions, that when he was a lecturer at Sheffield, he'd wanted to be a professor. Sorry, yes, he wanted to be a professor, but he also wanted to be a member of parliament. But if you're Tory in Sheffield, you're not going to get very far.
He became a lord, though, in the end, right?
He became a lord. Yeah, he had the right friends in the right places. So yes, it's a shame he wasn't of the right political persuasion, because he would have actually managed to get into Parliament, no doubt about it, and he could have done even greater things than he did in that vein. But yeah, I think one of the good things that he did was to show us that we needed a rounded archaeology. We think of him as being partly Mr. Theory, very much the academic's academic, but he too was particularly concerned about the practice of archaeology all the way through, in all its different ramifications. So yes, he encouraged us to put together that conference, and I think that conference was really important for my first proper job in archaeology, which was as an inspector of ancient monuments for English heritage. Of course, now it's been split in two, so this would be that half of it that we now call historic England. And that was 5.5 years of intense hard work. And I think in many ways, we regarded it as a kind of holy war, in that this was the moment that we were making the transition nationally from government granted rescue excavations to the contract commercial world that we have today. Many of us didn't want that to happen. We really liked the idea of a state-funded service, but there was no way that was going to be possible under the Thatcher government of the 1980s. So we had to work out the best way forward. And I think one of the things I'm most proud of is that I was able to write the first draft of what we then called PPG 16.
An iconic and significant document.
Yeah, I think the funniest thing of all was that my boss at the time, Jeff Wainwright, when I showed it to him, he said, "Oh my God, hide that away. Don't let anybody particularly in the Department of the Environment or Department of Natural Heritage, see it, because they'll work out that we're trying to make the polluter pay." And the feeling was that that Conservative government, of course, didn't want to put any kinds of constraints on development to make them have to pay for archaeological excavation. So I buried it, put it in a filing cabinet. 2 years went by, and then we had the Rose Theatre catastrophe in central London, and all of a sudden questions were being asked in Parliament, not because of archaeological pressure, but a bunch of actors, including Dustin Hoffman, all turning up at the theatre site and, of course, getting onto the television. But questions were asked in Parliament: what is the government's policy on archaeology? So Jeff comes into my office and says, "Where's that document, Mike?" So I fish it out of the filing cabinet, and it goes off to Jeff's boss, Jane Sharman. I think she sadly died a couple of years ago during COVID. And she redrafted it. And then my colleague, Graham Fairclough, who was a fellow inspector, spent the next 6 months negotiating back and forth with Department of Natural Heritage to actually get the precise wording. You see, they wanted to say you can't put the word money in there. All you can say is that you need to mitigate the damage. Ultimately, Graham did it. He found a form of words that was acceptable to both parties, without having to mention that any money had to pass hands. And we're still living with it today. I have to say I'm disappointed we're still living with it today, because I saw it very much as a moment of for improvement, that we could actually do way better. And for my PhD thesis, I was lucky to choose as my field area Denmark, and what they are doing with their commercial archaeology is the world leader, because there's no competitive tendering. Basically, each museum has its own unit, it has its own area, and any archaeology that's done there, they do it and they cost it and they carry it out and they publish it. So it means that it's properly researched, properly funded, and done by people who actually know their region extremely well. And it means they continue to produce top class results. I'd like us to be Denmark. I don't think it's going to happen. Not in my lifetime, though.
Yeah, that's a lovely point. That's a lovely point. I guess because we're now in what the current rendition is National Planning Policy Framework, which I guess is the historic environment section of that is the forebearer is PPG 16, which was so significant. I remember at the time, and certainly something that every undergraduate will be studying as part of their probably first year's studies. Derek, is it? Yeah, absolutely. He's nodding.
University you go to, I guess. At the first years.
So you mentioned there, Mike, your PhD. Did you do that after your 5 years at Historic England, or
no? So that was straight after my 3 years as an undergrad at Southampton, and we'd had all sorts of people coming to see us from all over the world. Renfrew was this magnet that people wanted to come and give seminars at Southampton from everywhere. But actually, it was the British archaeologists who I think were most fascinating. There was Richard Bradley, and there was also Ian Hodder, and I can remember both of their seminars extremely clearly from that time. And it was actually Ian's work that I was so interested in, because he was starting to ask some very unusual questions about material culture and meaning and identity. From his ethnoarchaeological work in East Africa, and I thought, that's the person I want to be my supervisor. So he was in Cambridge. I had to move to Cambridge, and in fact Renfrew joined me a year later, because he became the Disney chair in 1980. So he was still my professor all those years after. I think Hodder really set a completely new agenda, which we now call post-processual archaeology, looking at the relationship between material culture and meaning, really rethinking the formation processes of how we get from the archaeological statics to the dynamics. And very cleverly, he said to each of us, we became known as the Hodderites, or the Coggies, the cognitive play group. And he said, right, each of you will have a particular topic. So Chris Tilley was looking at design on pottery. So, because Chris is another one who's died this year, as you know, and who went on to do great things. And Ian said, right, Mike, you can do death, which was absolutely the beginning of a whole career in death and burial, which I've never looked back on. And what I felt was I needed to look at where was the best archaeology being done in the world, where we could get the contextual detail to compare burials with the settlement record, with the record of votive deposits and the rest of it. So putting the burial practices within the entire archaeological context. And the obvious place was Denmark. I think the great thing is I go back there regularly, because all the fellow students that I met there, they, like me, are now aging archaeologists, and it's just so great to see them. We became friends for life.
That's lovely, Mike. That's really nice, and I think thank you also for giving us the name of your podcast episode during that discussion point. But that's fascinating. And how do you think, so that transition from really being deep in some really significant theoretical archaeology, both at Southampton and Cambridge, and then you jump into English heritage for those 5 years and sort of almost into the policy wonk kind of genre. Was that a comfortable transition for you, or?
Well, in the first place, it was pretty weird going through 3 paradigm shifts in 4 years, from culture history to the new archaeology to post-processual archaeology.
Yes.
And then way back into really the archaeological experience that I'd known before I went to university, which was the world of the units. And I think, the first thing was how lucky I was to get that job. And I know that's because of the conference that we organised at Southampton, because 3 of us who organised that, apart from Tim Darvill, he was the one who didn't make it. 3 of us got that job as inspectors. The fourth being Bob Bewley, who'd come from Manchester, and it was it was a big transition. But I think the important thing was it just gave me the real interest in big projects and how to do archaeology in the field properly. The realization that it's got to be multidisciplinary. There's no individuals, it's huge teams that get things done well. And that was why when in 1989, the job at Sheffield was advertised, and I realized I had to go for it because that was the department that was really making waves at the time. It had archaeologists who were covered a whole range of different interests, particularly archaeological science. And I thought, well, yeah, if I want to run a big field project, these are all the people with all the skills that need to be involved. And I got the job, and they said, right, where do you want to dig? We've got 2 big projects on. There's the Peak District, or there is the Outer Hebrides. And I didn't really know where to go for. But my my friend Neil Sharples, who's a professor at Cardiff, of course, now, he said, Mike, the Outer Hebrides, and don't even think about it. You will not regret it. And yes, what a fantastic archaeological area it is. It's massively underappreciated even now. Orkney gets all the glory, but the quality of preservation, the time depth is quite astounding. So there we were learning that we had some of the most fabulously preserved archaeological remains anywhere in Europe, if not the world. These great settlement mounds, sequences of through time, house floors, house walls. It was almost in some senses like you were kind of walking into a house after somebody shut the door 3,000 years ago to find all the debris strewn across each floor. And we're finishing all the rest of our very last main excavation, getting it to publication right now.
You mentioned you're getting all that through to publication now. Do you still have any ongoing projects up there, or is it all just wrapping it up now?
Well, I've finished off, we're wrapping up, and we've got to get all the finds back via about Historic Environment Scotland and the finds panel. Other colleagues are still working there. So Jackie Melville has been leading some big public projects. So it's really not doing so much research, but actually sending, just talking to people about how you make antler tools and combs and things, just doing the public side of things. It's I think we've been lucky that we've also left a legacy of people working up there. But no, those days are done, just as my work in Madagascar is also now finished.
Oh, we should definitely come back, circle back to Madagascar. But I guess before we leave the Outer Hebrides and hop across the oceans, I guess there's quite an iconic Time Team episode of your work out there, isn't there? With am I right? Is that when if I'm remembering right, is that to do with the mummies?
No, that was simply an excavation on the southern island of Barra. And it was a salvage rescue project because there was a large sand blowout, and burials were being exposed as well as some prehistoric buildings. So our mummies did feature on the television, and I think that was one of those huge breakthrough moments because, although they were skeletons, it was the detective work to be able to establish that they had originally been buried with their soft tissue intact, despite already being of a considerable antiquity within the Bronze Age. And in terms of public perception within the islands, it was dramatic. In our favourite pub, I can remember going in there one night and everyone turning to me and say, what you said is just, what you found out is fantastic, because people think we all live in caves up here. You've actually shown the world that the Outer Hebrides was actually in the advance of civilization in prehistory. And I thought that was a nice way of thinking about it, because it often doesn't get the press that it requires. There is a sense that, oh dear, it's somewhere that's an unfortunate backwater. Not at all, of course.
Yeah, that's lovely. And often the whole we're only as relevant as when the public find our discipline relevant, right? So by shunning new lights, by championing new and really celebrating significant discoveries around the historic environment, then and adding community ownership of that is so valuable, beyond all the incredible academic and sort of theoretical work on top of that. Yeah. So let's cross those oceans then, Mike. Tell us about your work in Madagascar.
Well, that came out of the PhD, and I think one of the things I'd always wanted to do was to do an ethnoarchaeological study. I did one on the ground in Cambridge while I was preparing to go off and do my fieldwork on actual archaeological material in Denmark. But it was that feeling that I hadn't properly done the job. And what changed everything was that the British Museum held an exhibition called Madagascar Island of the Ancestors. And Karen, who would be my future wife, was working at the museum at the time and said, oh, we must go and look at this really interesting exhibition. And I was completely blown away. It's that sense that you can't really believe that people live in those kinds of relationships with their ancestors. And you often read anthropology books and you think, wow, well, that's a bit far-fetched, isn't it? Do people really do that? And she said, well, why don't we go? So we went there for just, a month's holiday, and it was terrifying. So all of a sudden you're pitched out into a chaotic capital city. You don't speak a word of Malagasy. You don't know anyone to go and contact. And we thought, well, maybe we could just stay in our hotel room for a month and then go back and tell people we'd had a great time. We'd been great adventurers or whatever. But one thing led to another, and it was for me a life-changing moment. So much so that when I started in Sheffield, and this was the year before, I thought I must start a project there. And by huge luck and coincidence, one of the exhibition organizers was Ramili Sonina, the Malagasy archaeologist who I would then work closely with for the next decade and more. And he and I and other colleagues, Retsa Hisatse and others, we had a stressful time. I have to admit, it was the hardest archaeology I've ever done, because we were in areas that were very difficult to get to, in situations where the notion of community archaeology did not exist at all. And even the concept of archaeology was something that was totally alien to people in the south of Madagascar. It was very hard. And I can remember Karen on various moments saying, if you really love me, you'll take me home now. But we kept going. And I'm really glad that we did. And it has created a bond with Ramili Sonin and Retsi Satse ever since. And knowing that that's the first place in the world where it is now acknowledged that climate change has led to desiccation and famine. You realize that we all live in a joined up world now. There's no point trying to build a wall to keep everybody else out. We are all one planet. So yes, that was the archaeology was hard, but we managed to carry out some quite large scale excavations. Otherwise, it was mostly survey. And I think one of the most exciting things was not just finding a lost civilization from the 11th to 13th centuries with trade links all the way to China and the Persian Gulf, but also to look at the disappearance of the megafauna, this elephant bird, the biggest bird that ever lived, 0.5 ton in weight, with eggshells bigger than rugby balls. And then the third thing that really interested me was that trying to bring together the archaeology with the ethnohistory. So that's the oral stories, the genealogies of people themselves, but also tying that in with the written documents by colonial powers from the Portuguese in the 16th century onwards. And we came across this story of a shipwrecked sailor, a young man from London called Robert Drury, who had ended up being kept as a slave for 14 years by the people of the South and eventually escaped and made it back. And at the time, it was generally thought that was a Daniel Defoe novel, much the same lines as Robinson Crusoe, but we were actually able to find the places that he talked about, even the village, the site of the village where he'd been kept for most of that time in slavery. And that was an amazing thing to follow that story. And of course, it's very much a kind of invert of what we think about the world of slavery, because these were indigenous Malagasy who were enslaving people coming to their country. And I have to say quite rightly too, because the Europeans they were attracting were themselves slavers. So the tables were turned, and you actually end up rooting for the Malagasy, not for the disgusting colonialists who are trying to loot and capture their people. So yes, that was quite a tale, and a huge amount of fun and interesting. But that's now all written up, a great big volume of all of our studies.
So am I right in thinking, Mike, that it's the work in Madagascar which sort of led you to some of your initial Stonehenge theories and then the blossoming of one of the largest research projects in the World Heritage Sites to have taken place?
One of the things that we realized very quickly working with Ramili Sonina from 1991 onwards was we'd never met anyone quite so lucky. He managed, whatever he turned his hand to, everything worked out. And given that we started in a general strike in Madagascar, he actually got us through an entire field season where there was no diesel, there were no civil servants to stamp authorizations and all the rest of it. But he got it all done. And we realized that we were just so lucky to work with someone who had almost a magical ability like that. So 1998, a Channel 4, was it Channel 4? Maybe it was, I don't know, maybe it was BBC 2, who cares, the documentary. And they said, we'd like to find out more about your work in Madagascar. And I said, well, you've got to get this man to come to Britain. And of course, I didn't mention the fourth angle of our project, because we were looking at people building megaliths, not just historically, but into the present day. And they said, yeah, we'll pay for his airfare. And in a very cold February, Ramil came to the UK, and we drove him first to Avebury and then to Stonehenge. And when he said, "What do you mean you don't know what it's for?" He just looked at me like I was an idiot and said, "Well, you've been working with me for how long in Madagascar? How many field seasons have we done? You should know that we build in stone for the ancestors and we build in perishable materials for the living. At least that's how it's been historically. Obviously, things are changing in the modern world." And, I just thought, well, yes, but this is not Madagascar. This is 5,000 years ago on Salisbury Plain. And then I just started thinking about what we did know about Salisbury Plain. And I realized that, well, actually, maybe he's got a point, because there is Stonehenge and there's also Woodhenge. Are they actually contemporary? Because at that point we had no idea. In fact, we thought that the timber circles, Woodhenge and the two inside Durrington Walls Henge, the northern and southern circles, we thought they were all earlier than Stonehenge itself. And then I thought, well, actually, maybe this is the kind of metaphor that pops up every now and again in different parts of the world, this sense of the eternal, the permanent, to do with memorialization and the dead and the ancestors. And of course, we have it in our own culture in the form of tombstones that are permanent markers to the memory of the deceased, that it's maybe not such a crazy idea after all. And that just set the ball rolling. And I waited because I thought, well, in fact, first of all, he and we sat in my bedroom, and in the matter of 3 days, we wrote an article for Antiquity setting out our brilliant idea. Some people said, "Whoa, right, that's really interesting." I remember someone saying, "That's the worst idea you've ever had." And I just thought, someone's got to go and find out, because the great thing is we could make predictions that Woodhenge and Stonehenge had to be of the same date, that there had to be an avenue from Durrington Walls to the river, like there was an avenue at Stonehenge. Was Durrington Walls in some way to do with the living? Was Stonehenge to do with the ancestors? These were all easily testable propositions, and I was sure somebody would be itching to prove us wrong. But no, they just wanted to argue like angels on the head of a pin about what we already knew without wanting to go and get new data. So I finally cracked, and 4 years later, 2002, assembled a team, and that included Kate Wellham, your very good colleague in Bournemouth, and another 4 others, Colin Richards, Julian Thomas, Chris Tilley, and Josh Pollard. And yeah, we had the project of our lives, I suppose, that came out of that, as you know, and we're still running now as it's morphed from one form to another.
Yeah, I can completely understand why it would be the project of your lives, and I guess some of the highlights from those many years. So you started, you said 2004, did you say?
That was the first spade in the ground.
First spade in the ground, and it finished in
preliminary work in
2009.
2009, and then out of that came the Feeding Stonehenge project.
That's right.
And we also did the Beaker People project, looking at isotopes and skeletons, the people, if you like, of the time. And we're now still in the Stones of Stonehenge project, where we're working with geologists and looking at the places that Stonehenge's stones originated from, which we're getting more and more wild.
the Stonehenge Riverside project. I mean, I will miss out so many headlines here, but just the headlines I can think of off the top of my head: excavating inside Stonehenge and the Aubrey holes, and re-excavating the human remains that had previously been sort of placed there during past excavations. The discovery of Neolithic houses and an avenue at Durrington Walls. The discovery of a brand new, previously unknown stone circle, Blue Stonehenge, at the end of the avenue. The identification of a stone dressing area just outside Stonehenge itself. investigations in the cursus, investigations in erratic standing stones, investigations on long barrows. The list, I've barely done that justice in terms of the level of geophysics.
Well, that's very impressive, Lawrence. That you can pull that off. Well,
but it's, I think, in what's 2004 to 2009, that's not a huge amount of time, but you can see, you talked earlier about the need to bring together a number of experts and a number of specialists, and it's a team effort. And what the Stonehenge Riverside project demonstrates as an exemplar to that is just what you can achieve by being open and by being collaborative and really bringing in the right people and the right resources.
I think beyond the people and resources, you mentioned all of those fantastic achievements and discoveries, but I challenge you to find an archaeologist around our age who wasn't involved in that project in some way. It's incredibly rare to meet someone who wasn't connected or linked through some element of a project. It's remarkable how far it's kind of reached out into an entire generation of archaeologists.
And for our project in South Urston Barrow in the Hebrides, 1,000 students came through that project, and of course they're from a slightly older generation. So they're now, dare I say, middle-aged in the 40s and even 50s. But as you say, yes, I think at any one time in our biggest year, we had 240 students on the project, and of course the campsite, that wonderful place at Woodbridge. It was like a festival. It was just fabulous fun.
One of my fondest memories of that camping was someone had the idea. Was it Adam Stanford that had the idea? They were giving tours around some of the trenches in 2008, and someone thought, let's put a Diggers Beer Fund pot out. And I've never seen so much alcohol in my life because of the success of that giant pot of money.
Why hadn't we thought of that earlier? Why did we leave it until 2008?
Oh, very good. So I guess before we move on to Pride, Envy, and Time Machines, is that was all at Sheffield, and you're at UCL now, and you mentioned your work also about the stones of Stonehenge. So your works and your career progressions and trajectories are still heading in and very much in an upward trajectory, Mike, and you're keeping very busy with all of that also.
Yes, it's been a huge amount of post-excavation, and I'm really pleased that we're making headway with getting all those huge excavation volumes published. So literally going to get the final Hebridean monograph, the second part of our Clathhallen excavation, the mummy site. So all the specialist reports, that's finally going to the publishers immediately after Christmas. And then we've got the third of what is now 5 Stonehenge volumes is also going to go to the Dutch publisher Sidestone Press after that. So that just leaves us with another 2 Stonehenge Riverside volumes, and then we will have a big volume on the Bluestones in Wales. So that's going to be probably the final big excavation report, but also all the little excavations we've been publishing as we go along. Because it is the most important thing we ever do as archaeologists, is make sure that we leave behind a fully published archive. It's been the bane of Stonehenge, I have to say, that every excavator who dug a hole there in the 20th century failed to write it up adequately. And I think the worst thing was that one excavator, Richard Atkinson, said terrible things about William Hawley, the excavator before him, because he only produced interim reports, and then Atkinson goes and does the same, having been so deeply to the guy before him. So it is a real problem that we need to take very seriously. So that's what I'm getting down is the boring bit, the millstone round,
the important bits, Mike. And
exactly. But
I guess in that vein,
I say boring, but actually, I think one of the great things about post-excavation is you do discover things you just didn't notice at the time. This has really come through with our Clathallen site, because in the houses built on top of the mummies, we had debris from casting metal artifacts, so bronze metallurgy, and we've been able to work out that it was actually happening on the hearth in the middle of each house, and it was happening every time they renewed the house, when they founded the house and when they renewed it. So at renewal, you take the roof off. So it was, for the first time ever, we've seen the actual kind of the cyclicity of bronze casting, and we've got it in a secure domestic context, something we really didn't know anything about until now. And yeah, at the time, while digging, we had no idea that this was going on. But it's not just the artifacts, it's even things like the soil micromorphology, identifying the residues of metal casting from the way that the tiny fragments are burnt within the soil profile.
That's amazing. That is amazing. And think like that's so significant to discover. And as you say, as a result of doing the important hard work at the end of all the fun stuff in the field. And I wonder, before we move on to the next three questions, one thing we're looking to ask more people in this season is words of wisdom, words of advice for undergraduates, early careers, or people that are perhaps looking to change their career. What do you think makes a good career in ruins? We always talk about luck in the podcast, and it has a lot to do with it, but there's an element of being able to make your own luck. And how would you encourage people to do that?
Throw yourself into it. It should be something you really enjoy. It's fun for you. It's fun with other people. And I think one of the key things is getting just the practical experience as much of and as soon as you can. I think our generation, we're incredibly lucky because we were already professional archaeologists by the time we rocked up at university as undergraduates. That's very hard to do now. But I would just say to anyone and everyone starting right at the beginning, get on a project. Now, the problem is these days, you often have to pay to dig. We laughed at that sort of idea back in the 70s because we were paid by the state. And it was one of the great things about a state-funded archaeology service that we were broadly part of. So that's the first thing, because out of that comes competence and confidence, as well as the sheer thirst of curiosity, wanting to find out. And I think that's what I really like to try and inspire in students these days, is it's about, you can find out anything you like. There's a huge amount of information out there, not all of it good and reliable, but exercise your curiosity, because that's fundamentally at the heart of this. And we are so lucky to be able to do that. Even if we end up in a kind of office job where we're not out in the field very much, we're still broadly in the job of finding out and communicating that to a wider audience, whether it's our colleagues, whether it's the community and the public at large. So, it's I've heard this said by Barry Cunliffe several times, that he never had a proper job in archaeology because he's never really felt that he's had to go to work. He spent his life doing what he wanted to do. And I, to a large measure, have shared that opportunity, that fun of doing what I want to do. So I think that's the thing. And I can remember one or two students in the past who weren't actually they didn't want to do archaeology. They were stuck doing it. And they were saying, why am I failing? Why do I need to have to rewrite these essays? Why can't I take anything in? And I said, because this is, you're not enjoying it. You're not thinking, I'm really looking forward to reading that book. I really want to go and see that excavation. I really want to join that excavation. If you haven't got that, then it's not going to happen.
And fantastic advice, and I see it in so many students, those who throw themselves into every experience that there is to offer. They have that love, they have that eye for it, that passion, that inescapable thing that makes people stay in this wonderful job, which sometimes doesn't feel like a job.
And we're really lucky because we work collectively.
Mm.
So we work in teams. We work together. We're not sequestered in our own little boxes like some professions. And that's also the fun and the joy of actually, working together indoors, outdoors, which is really important because it's also all about just getting on with each other and not pissing each other off by saying, "Well, I'm clever. I'm really clever. Are you as clever as me?" The advice is don't be a dick.
I want that on a t-shirt. Just
Yes.
I'll be honest. That was the behavioural policy on my first field school.
Right.
It had a lot of addendums and other bits under it, but it was basically don't be a dick. Oh, Mike, I've got to move us on to our next proper question, but it feels a bit redundant in your case, given the incredible career you've had and the very many things you must have to be proud of. But if you could choose something throughout your career that you're particularly proud of, be that a project, an achievement, or some part of your career, what would it be?
Well, yeah, I'm very proud of drafting PPG 16, especially because not a lot of people know that I did it. But then there are so many other things. Yeah, digging that wonderful site at Clathallen with the mummies in, and just the perfect archaeology. It was the most challenging excavation, deep stratified prehistory. So I loved that, and yeah, of course we mentioned Stonehenge. Um, what else? Oh, I'm very proud of what we're doing in Wales at the moment. We had a fantastic field season this year, and I think we've been looking for the focus, the central um, uh, place where the quarries were producing the megaliths for, and I think we've just found it. So that's going to keep me busy for at least the next year or so. Yeah,
just found the original quarry of Stone, the original source of Stonehenge. On to the next thing. I wondered, Mike, whether you might mention the Darrington Dong as being the thing that you're most proud of.
Ah, yes, now you're talking. Yes, exactly. Yes.
So for any, describe what Darrington Dong is for anyone that may not have.
It's the best cocktail in the world, and it all happened because we were running out of vital ingredients on the campsite at the Woodbridge Inn while digging at Darrington and Stonehenge, and we had gin and we had Campari and we had red vermouth, all the classic ingredients of what's called a Negroni, a famous cocktail invented in the late 19th century. But what we were after was the kind of mixer that you might put in there. I think we had some Elsan Blue, but we weren't prepared to put that in there. But what we did have was bottles of ginger beer. So that went in on top of the Negroni, and we call it a dong because that same day we discovered a flint phallus at Darrington Walls in one of the pits. The only other finds in that pit were a pair of flint balls. So,
to all of our American listeners,
Darrington Dong it is.
To our American listeners, a dong is British slang for a penis.
Well done. Someone had to say that.
Yeah. I mean, pride's probably a very easy one, I guess, Mike, because fantastic career and incredible sort of portfolio of sites and discoveries. But what about envy then? I mean, is there anything that anyone or anything that you've seen you go, oh well, that's something I would have liked to have done?
Yeah, no question. Göbekli Tepe, the earliest megalithic site in the world. And as soon as I heard about it, I thought, I've got to go and see that. So Karen, my wife, and I, we went out there, got a flight to Ankara, changed flights to Sanliurfa, and made contact with the German director, who said, yeah, come, I'll show you around. Klaus Schmidt, the late Klaus Schmidt. He too is dead, and we just went to see this fabulous excavation with all of these carved stone pillars, each of them set in multiple numbers in different buildings. And this this artificial settlement mound way up above the Syrian plain down below on this limestone plateau, just stunning. And I mean, we may argue about exactly how old it is, but it looks like it's somewhere around 11,000 years old. And given that Stonehenge is, what, 5,000 max, given that the earliest megaliths in Europe, in Brittany, are likely to be, well, not quite 7,000 years ago, it is just mind-boggling. Of course, there are many more of them now in that particular on that particular plateau, sites with these pillars. Just staggering. Why did it start there? How did it happen? What was going on? This is a society which is broadly in long-term transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture. How does that play in? The fact that this is the kind of crossroads of the world between the continents of Asia, Europe, and Africa to the south, that makes it all the more intriguing. What a place. Yes, I'd give up Stonehenge any day for it.
I know that is I can understand your answer. It's a site I've never been to and I would love to, but my wonderful colleague Fiona Coward's just come back from a trip there and she's been spamming me with pictures of megaliths for the last week or so. It looks absolutely fantastic. Now, Mike, we've got to take you to our final question now. I can't believe how time's flown by. But as you may or may not know, Lawrence and I have developed a working time machine, and a tradition on the podcast is to give every guest a return ticket to somewhere in the past you'd like to visit. So where would you like to go, Mike?
Oh dear. Well, I suppose there's probably only one answer, isn't there? Somewhere in Salisbury Plain, somewhere around. Well, I mean, do I go for the very first stage, 3000 BC, the decades after? We can pin that down fairly well now. It's somewhere probably between 3000 and 2920 BC. Or do we go for the second stage where the huge Sarsens are brought in around 2500? Bit tricky because, of course, we've got a wider time range in terms of radiocarbon years. So you could miss all the events, arrive far too early, or arrive far too late. So, but yeah, I think I'd probably like to know that.
Is there
maybe we can have multiple trips at different
I think what we'll do, we'll just cycle through so we can just see go fast.
You can have a fast forward.
Fast forward.
and then find out about that altar stone coming over.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is there a particular thing that is there a question in the Stonehenge landscape that you still just want to answer?
I think I'd like to go back. Well, there are two. I'd like to go and excavate an untouched Aubrey hull, just to be absolutely sure that they did hold standing stones. We may get an answer in Wales because we may be able to date, if we're right, the complex we've found. Well, if we can date the removal of stones there, that ought to be around the same time as those blue stones get set up at Stonehenge. But the other thing is, of course, is to go back to our beloved Darrington walls. And it's Julian Thomas's excavation of what we called the Western enclosures. So these were a series of 5 mini henges inside the great village of Darrington Walls that has the henge built on top of it. And the central one, because each of these, the two that Julian excavated, both had houses inside them. They weren't very well preserved because they'd been eroded, whereas the ones we excavated elsewhere at Darrington Walls were beautifully preserved, house floors, debris on the floors and everything. But the fact that house platform was terraced into the hillside makes me think that we ought to have better preservation further back at the base of the terrace, and maybe we'd get more answers about who or what was inhabiting that house, because it's absolutely, it's the crucial building within that entire village. And we're torn. We've got two possibilities. Yes, it could be inhabited by people, a family, maybe, Mr. and Mrs. Big and Baby Big, or it's actually, some kind of cult house or spirit house where a fire is maintained but nobody lived there, because we have the mystery that all the features were so clean of anything. That we know it's the houses inside the western enclosures are very different to the ordinary dwellings that we were finding elsewhere on the site. So yeah, I'd like to know more about that.
There's still plenty of time, Mike, and the rate you get these projects over the line, I look forward to catching up with you in 10 years' time and having the answer to those questions.
Well, let's hope we're still alive.
I've no doubt. Mike, thank you so much for your time this evening and for joining us and sharing your career in ruins with our listeners. It's been an absolute treat, so thank you for joining us.
It's been a real pleasure. Great to see you too.
Thank you. And with that, I'd just like to say thank you to all our listeners, and it was great to have such a positive response to our first episode of this new season last week. So do keep listening, do share with your friends and family, and thank you again for our Patreon supporters. Derek, for now, did you enjoy the song I shared with you last week?
It had its charms. I'm going to have to look at the podcast metrics to see if anyone listened very far into it. But
a few people have told me they enjoyed it, so there's at least a few people that listen to it. Yeah.
So is this a thing now? Is this something we're going to do every week?
So what have you got for me?
Oh, I've got a treat. I've gone next level on this one.
Okay, let's hear it.
I've snuck in a bit of a familiar tune.
Derek's got his nose, Lauren's got his grin. They dive into the past with a wink and a spin. From Roman roads to Neolithic nights, they're bringing ancient worlds to modern mics. It's just another day in the office, digging up tales, uncovering mysteries, following trails. Through layers of time they banter and play. Just another day in the office, chipping history away. Chipping history away. Derek's got his notes, Lauren's got his grin. They dive into the past with a wink and a spin. From Roman roads to Neolithic nights, they're bringing ancient worlds to modern mics. It's just another day in the office, digging up tales, uncovering mysteries, following trails. Through layers of time they banter and play. Just another day in the office, chipping history away. Derek's got his notes, Lauren's got his grin. They dive into the past with a wink and a spin. From Roman roads to Neolithic nights, they're bringing ancient worlds to modern mics. It's just another day in the office, digging up tales, uncovering mysteries, following trails. Through layers of time they banter and play. Just another day in the office, chipping history away. History away, history away, in history away.